Mental Health Wilderness First Aid provides practical, evidence-based mental health skills training to those who live, work, or play out in wilderness or remote areas. Hi folks, I'm Day Hagel. I'm the director and the founder of Mental Health Wilderness First Aid, and my background is primarily as a wilderness kayak guide, which means I've spent lots and lots of time, over 15 years, being out on the water in remote areas with folks like youth camps and with older folks out on wilderness expeditions, doing training programs for colleges, that kind of thing. Spent lots of field days, over 15 years, racked up over 1,500 days in the field, mostly as a kayak guide, but also doing things like canoeing, rock climbing, some hiking, that kind of thing. I eventually became the executive director of the Sea Kayak Guides Alliance of British Columbia, which is our provincial certifying program out here on the West Coast. Spent a little bit of time with ground search and rescue with my local team here on Salt Spring Island as well. And I also have a master's in anthropology and a master's in counseling and psychology. And at this point in time, I'm also a Canadian certified counselor with the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. So I do have a small private practice. I've worked a lot in trauma healing and with First Nations out along the coast. That's what I spent 5 years of my clinical internship and then my professional degree or my professional practice doing. Most of what I do, though, at this point in time is run this program, which is Mental Health Wilderness First Aid. So the problem that we're looking at here is that when we do our Wilderness First Aid training, if we're working out in remote areas, then generally we have a Wilderness First Aid training program. And those training programs are fantastic, and I'm not critiquing them because they have a focus on medical first aid, and they do that very well. Generally, what's neglected in that conversation is some first aid level training skills for what to do to support people with their mental health. And when I was working as a guide pretty full time, right, I noticed that most of the time what I was doing to support people in the field, in addition to things like small wound care and blister care, wasn't necessarily the medical first aid skills that I was utilizing, but probably every trip I went on, I was supporting somebody with anxiety or somebody who had had a recent loss or was going through grief or trauma response, that kind of thing. And I didn't have skills to help support those folks. So that's what eventually got me on the journey to become a clinical counselor, and then eventually to develop this program, which is specialized for remote area work. Because the other problem that we run into sometimes is that with the other mental health training programs that do exist, and there are some good ones out there, but they're generally oriented to urban areas, right? And so they assume things. They assume, for instance, that you have maybe easy access to a phone line and you can consult with somebody. They might assume that you have access to resources in the city that don't necessarily exist in the backcountry. They might err on the side of caution when deciding what to do to support somebody and say, hey, get this person to a hospital or to a psychiatrist or whatever. And those kinds of resources might be a luxury in the backcountry, and they also might take just more time. Even if I am going to evacuate someone for a mental health reason, that might take hours or days. And so what is it that I might do along the way to support that person? So I might need some more nuanced skills, more nuanced skill set if I'm working in backcountry areas. And then the other thing is that if I am going to evacuate somebody, it's possible that the evacuation itself might be risky. And so I might have a more nuanced lens on, when do I really need to evacuate someone and get some outside support? And when is something potentially field manageable? And how can I set myself and my clients up for success before we go into the field with how we're going to respond to anything mental health wise that comes up? So that's where this program comes in. And the other thing I like to remind folks of is that you don't have to be a therapist or a mental health professional to offer effective, powerful, helpful mental health first aid or just response in the moment, right? And I think sometimes this is a bit of a stumbling block because, people quite rightly want to be aware of their boundaries and not overstep and not say the wrong thing, right? But I think if somebody came to you in the field and they said, hey, I cut my hand, can you help me? And your response were, well, I'm not a doctor, you should just go see a doctor because I don't want to make it worse. There's some validity to sometimes people need to go see a professional. And at the same time, it's like, what a missed opportunity. Are there not any number of things that you can do that are completely appropriate in a first aid context and that can help the person in the moment, even if they are on the way to going to see the doctor? And some cuts are field manageable. So that's where this program comes in, like mental health wise, right? I think, yes, sometimes people do need to go see a professional, and that is part of the course, is, making evacuation decisions and helping people connect to resources. And at the same time, are there any number of things that we can do as mental health first aiders that are effective and practical with folks in the field? So here's a little bit about the courses we run and what we offer. Okay, we have two general levels of certification that we offer, and then there's all kinds of other things on the side as well. The general program that most people go through and they start with is called the basic program. That's 16 hours long. Everyone starts here, and that covers a bunch of things. So in this basic program, we cover what is mental health. So what do we mean by that? A couple different perspectives on mental health. We talk about where diagnoses come from, mental health wise, at least in North America, the strengths and limitations of the psychiatric system in general and mental health diagnoses. Then we talk about our lens, because we're not diagnosticians as mental health first aiders, right? So our lens in this program going forward is what we call the nervous system lens on mental health. In other words, whether or not the person qualifies for a diagnosis per se, we may or may not know that or have access to that information. But regardless of any diagnoses or not diagnoses, how is the person doing right now in the field in front of us, right? How is their nervous system doing, right? Are they activated in their nervous system? Are they having a stress response? Is that stress response helpful or not helpful to them, right? And how can we help the person regulate right in front of us, right? Both for myself and the client that I'm supporting, and potentially for the whole group. How can we help regulate the nervous systems of a whole group? So we talk a lot about the nervous system and how our brain is our friend and it's always trying to protect us. And then we cover communication strategies, right? And so some of this you may or may not be familiar with, but things like active listening, assertive communication, gentle boundaries, those kinds of things we include in there. Those will be the foundation of the rest of the course, right? Then we talk about what we call mental health wilderness first aid steps. So in other words, we move from this more skill-based and theoretical kinds of discussions to, okay, how can we actually apply this to a scenario? Somebody's having a hard time in the wilderness. What on earth do we say or do? How do we orient ourselves to that situation? And we have a selection of steps that we like to orient ourselves to. So we always like to say the first step is the relationship. The relationship is the foundation of all other mental health work and support going forward. And I think relationship works with you with a number of different areas, right? If you have a relationship with somebody, they're more likely first of all, if you have a relationship with somebody, you're more likely to notice when something's up, something's wrong, not quite right. The person's not quite themselves, perhaps, or is struggling in some way. If you have a relationship, you're more likely to have an intuitive sense of what might be helpful in that situation. And number 3 is that if you have a relationship with the person, or if you can build a relationship in the moment with the person's more likely to be receptive to anything else you have to offer, right? Whether that's an idea for regulation or some de-escalation or some problem-solving strategies or advice, whatever it is, right? The person's more likely to be open to that if you have a relationship with them. And so we talk about relationship, and we talk about some strategies for building relationship or reinforcing relationship right in the moment, even if you don't necessarily know the person for very long, which sometimes we don't if we're out in remote areas, right? Second step we talk about is just regulation. How do we help everybody's nervous systems to regulate, right? Because if there's some kind of mental health challenge going on, then probably what's happening is folks are escalated in their nervous system or in their threat response. And likely, if you're responding to that, your nervous system is escalated as well. And so we talk about what we call the primary assessment, which is all about safety and stabilization. We have an ABCs that we look out for right away in a mental health scenario. And then nervous system interventions that help regulate, or we call them lizard brain interventions, right? How do we help the nervous system to regulate? Once we get to a regulated place where we have a bit of relationship built with someone, then we move into step number 3, which is called rationality, or sometimes we call this the secondary survey, right? And the secondary survey is, okay, once we are regulated in our nervous system, right, we've de-escalated a bit, Now, what are our options? What information do we want to gather to get a bigger picture of what's going on? What might be helpful to the person? What is the person interested in? Does this person want my help? Those are all questions we ask in the secondary survey. And then some ideas for interventions and problem-solving strategies. And that works with what some of you might be familiar with CBT triangle, where feelings, thoughts, behaviors are all interconnected. And so we look at how do we offer some thought awareness and thought challenging, or behavior awareness and behavior challenging. And then finally, we look at resources, connecting people to resources, because we are offering first aid, which implies that there's more to come, right? So we look at things like making a field support plan, which is a short, simple written document that we can just all be oriented to how to support this person going forward. We're going to look at an evacuation decision. Are we going to stay in the field with this person? Are we going to evacuate non-urgently or urgently? What kinds of folks are out there to help connect this person to? And all of that becomes part of how we wrap up a scenario. Right? And in the 16-hour course of the basic certification, we focus generally on the topics of anxiety, stress. We talk about panic attack. We talk briefly about an introduction to psychological trauma. And those are what we orient our scenarios around with the steps. Okay. The second level of certification, or the next course that we offer, is our intermediate certification, or a 40-hour certification. Now, if you've already done the first 16 hours, then the good news is that you just take an upgrade course that adds on those additional hours to get you up to 40. And in the 40-hour course, or the intermediate course, what we look at is we use all the same tools and techniques and steps and kind of general outline as we learned in the basic course. But what we do in those extra hours that get you up to 40 are we get into what you might think of as the bigger mental health issues, right? So first of all, we talk about resilience, because I think no matter what else folks are struggling with, we do want to encourage folks to see everybody through a lens of resilience, right? How is this person not only struggling, but also surviving or even thriving, right? Even if they are also still struggling in some areas. So we don't just want to see people for their deficits, we also want to see them for their strengths. And then we get into, like I said, the bigger mental health issues. So we have some particular tools and techniques and scenarios for supporting folks who might be uncooperative or not as interested in our help, strategies for encouraging cooperation. We talk about depression and mood disorders. We talk about grief and loss. Trauma and PTSD, we spend quite a bit of time on trauma and PTSD. We also cover in that section not just folks who might have trauma symptoms from something they've experienced before coming into the field, but also what if we have an incident happen in the field, for instance, like a near miss or something like that, right? Or there was a close call. What are some things that we can do to effectively increase protective factors and decrease risk factors for folks who have gone through something like that, so that we can reduce the likelihood of that experience resulting in lasting trauma? And there's some powerful things that we can do in the field with that perspective. We also talk about psychosis and psychotic disorders, disordered eating practices, self-harming behavior, and suicidal ideation, or in other words, suicidal thoughts. Ideas for noticing, asking, responding to those kinds of situations. So lots we cover in the 40-hour course. Obviously some heavy topics, and at the same time, quite an empowering course. We find that folks come away feeling activated and engaged and quite empowered from that course. And finally, we offer all kinds of different workshops for staff trainings, for kind of one-offs for classrooms, all kinds of different things, conferences, presentations, and those are a lot of fun too. They can be on pretty much, any of the topics we cover, or potentially something more flexible, and really they can be any length as well. So all different kinds of things for all different groups. And we do have a lot of fun groups come through this program. One of my favorite things about the program is working with all our different, very diverse students from different backgrounds. Most of what we do publicly actually is run these courses online, because then they're accessible to folks across the world. And we've had folks from across North America, and also down in Chile and Argentina and Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan. We've had some fantastic folks come through. We work a lot with outdoor educators and wilderness guides, which is a bit more where my background has come from. But we also have all kinds of other folks come through. We work, a lot of our folks are search and rescue. We have First Nations come through, which again is most of my clinical background is working in First Nations communities. We have tree planters are a big demographic that come through. Post-secondary students, remote area teachers or remote area oil rig workers. There's all kinds of folks who come through, and they're all a joy to work with. So we do get invited to some interesting places, both indoors and outdoors. We have no problem running field programs where we're actually out in a wilderness or remote area, and we've traveled all over for this kind of thing. That's a lot of fun too. Couple more offerings for you. In addition to the courses that you're welcome to check out right now, one is the Mental Health Wilderness First Aid Manual. That is available in PDF form and in print form. We'll mail that to you anywhere in the world. And you are welcome to check out the table of contents and read the introduction to the manual that's posted online in the link in the description, plus the QR code. So the other thing you're more than welcome to come and check out is our guest speaking events, and we've had all kinds of folks come through to offer guest speaking events. They're online, they're free events, and that covers things like the neuroanatomy of trauma, healing, and resilience. We've had folks come through and talk about outdoor activities that are rhythmical, for instance, hiking, paddling, moving, being in a group, and how that works with the different parts of the brain and how that increases resilience in the face of trauma and trauma healing. We've had folks come through and talk about natural cycles, grief and loss, critical incident stress management and debriefing, medications in backcountry context from a wilderness first aid perspective, and mental health medications specifically, skateboarding and trauma healing, traditional teachings around healing and around mental health and wellness in general, from a First Nations perspective. There's all kinds of beautiful guest speakers that we've had, so check those out as well and consider watching some or joining us for our next one. So that's a little overview of the course that we offer and who we work with and what we can do with you. And if we can be of support in any way, please send us a message and jump on the mailing list, or we can chat about a course as well. It'd be great to see you out there. Happy trails.